market has, what, doubled or tripled in that time? That money hasn't come down to normal people. Is it just that we're just very comfortable with that as the status quo?
Yeah, I think we have to think about the idea that there's not a perfect economy, but there is an economy.
What?
Right.
Sir?
Right. But there are a series of choices that we make, and they have results. And there's a real trade-off between what's good for capital and what's good for labor. You could argue over the course of...
And when does the what's good for labor part kick in?
Yeah, I think that's the real difficulty, is that the decisions we do make over and over again tend to be better for capital than they are for working people. When we talk about raising interest rates, whether that's needed or not, we know that there are downside impacts. The downside impacts is that economic growth is reduced. People lose their jobs. Those people who lose their jobs are at the lower end of the economic spectrum. So there are a lot of challenges and risks involved with the decisions we've made.
The catch here is if you don't raise interest rates when you need to, then inflation goes up, and everybody wants higher interest rates for mortgages and everything because they want to be compensated for inflation.
Here's what the workers have suffered. Automation has taken their jobs. Globalization has taken their jobs. Regulations have been removed. Union power has dissolved. So it's been one erosion after another of their power. They finally get a little bit of a foothold, and immediately the Fed says, we got to put a stop to this.
Yeah, I mean, the inflation hawks, we may not be giving them enough credit. I mean, I think the viewpoint is much more dangerous than just they are cures for inflation, right? Their diagnosis is also a problem. The prescription is obliterate the labor market. We don't want that. But the diagnosis is Americans have it too well off. And that means nothing else.
And that's driving, and then they're going to want more. And we can't have that.
Right, and these are the same folks who are going to oppose student debt cancellation because we can't put another dollar in Americans' pockets because, oh no, that will increase inflation.
Is a permanent underclass a necessity for American capitalism?
Well, it didn't used to be. I mean, there used to be a lot of rotation.
Well, we were able to change that, weren't we?
No, I mean, that is the single biggest problem with our system at the moment. There's not the mobility. The Horatio Alger story, if that means anything to this generation. It used to be,
Doesn't even mean anything to my generation.
No, it used to be, you're born in poverty and you work hard and you're enterprising and you pull yourself up. And that's possible, but it gets harder and harder.
And that's part of the reason that Americans were tolerating such high levels of inequality and such high levels of persistent inequality, was the idea, okay, fine, we're okay with a few rich people as long as everybody has their shot at making it. But over the last few decades, it's become really clear that economic opportunity in this country is highly concentrated. I mean, where the stork drops you in the United States matters, what race you are, where you're born.
By the way, a brilliant economist, but that's not actually how babies... Oh, forget it. We're not...
Yeah. We are back here at WLTH 1370 AM in the Friday Night Death Slot. I'm Scott Cannon here, December 15th, 6:38 p.m. on My Country with Scott Cannon, Issues and Answers Friday. That number is 219-885-1371. That number again, 219-885-1371. If you want to talk about what we talked about in the first segment, Emerson burning to a crisp and the sheer volume of abandoned schools we have here. As you just heard in the intro right here, everything costs too doggone much. Inflation is killing us, particularly working class Americans. Now, if you listen to the corporate media, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC even, you're going to hear all these people talk about how basically because for a very brief period of time during the pandemic, really 2020, people got a little funky $1,200 check, and then we got a little funky $1,400 check, and then a funky $600 check. Because of that, that's why everything costs so much money now. Because that's why we have inflation. Notice, whenever something helps the public, particularly the poor and the working class, it causes inflation. But endless wars, sending hundreds of billions to Ukraine, expanding the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, bailing out Wall Street and corporations time and time again. Man, that's just the cost of doing business. That doesn't cost inflation. But anyway, our friends over at the Daily Kos basically just reported on this study from UK-based think tanks, IPPR and Commonwealth, and have shown that profiteering has played a major role in the huge price increases that we've seen over the last few years. Now, this team analyzed 1,350 companies listed on stock markets in the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Britain, and South Africa. They found that profits rose by 30% amongst firms listed in the UK, and this increase being primarily driven by 11% of them garnering super profits in the post-pandemic world. In the US, the profits were even more excessive here in America, but even more broadly based, involving 33% of companies. 33% of companies are price gouging us, making record profits while telling us everything costs more. Giant energy companies like NIPSCO. Who said that? Mining companies, monopolistic food companies all saw their profits leap ahead of inflation after the February 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because energy and food prices feed so significantly into costs across all sectors of the wider economy, this exacerbated the initial price shock, contributing to inflation peaking higher and lasting longer than had there been less market power. So I've noticed this. I know you've noticed this. I go to the supermarket every week, and everything is excessively priced. Anything I want to buy, hamburger, bread, cereal, French fries, vegetables, whatever, all of it costs so much more than it did just, hell, a few years ago. And now we're seeing that the cost of the problem with that is not that the American public got a funky few $1,000s during the worst pandemic in 100 years. It is because these corporations are greedy and jacked up their prices because they could, and nobody holds them accountable for it. Technology companies, telecommunications, and banking also raised their profit margins with big price hikes. Oh boy, so if you're paying a lot more for your internet or banking fees, they also got in on the fun. Such companies have been able to protect their profit margins or even increase them, generating excess profits through a combination of high market power and global market dynamics, the report has said. Some examples of companies who boosted profits the most from their pre-pandemic average include ExxonMobil, of course, with profits of over almost $19 billion. Oh, I'm sorry. They went from $19 billion to $66.6 billion. So they tripled their profits. They went from $19 billion to $66.6 billion. And don't think that we ain't noticed that 66.6 here. We all know who they making their deal with over at ExxonMobil. Shell billion rose from $20 billion to $55 billion. Archer Daniels Midland, or ADM, went from $1,077,000,000 to $4 billion. Kraft Heinz went from 333 million to 2.3 billion. So they multiplied their profits 9 times, about 9 times, 8 or 9 times over at Kraft Heinz. Wow, this is horrific. Monopolistic market clout drove some of those higher profits. This has caused significant harm to the economy as a whole. No kidding. Global GDP could be 8% higher than it is now had market power not risen. Labor income is significantly lower and economic dynamism is weaker with poor choice, worse product quality, and fewer economic opportunities than in a counterfactual world where big corporations were less dominant. We talk about this very regularly here. The effect of corporate power on all of our lives. I am more than proud to say that since I started this show, and even when I was on the other show on Mondays, that is one thing that's been consistent, the effect of corporate power. That's why I do this, to push back against corporate power. Everything that happens in our country is affected by our politicians basically being owned by these politicians. That's why even though certain people may want to try to denigrate me for speaking out about COVID and the vaccine and how so many of our politicians are owned and and controlled by these companies. But this is what it is. This is what it is. Pfizer owns our media. That's a fact.
Bill Gates' advice on how to combat mistrust in science at 60minutesovertime.com. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer.
These companies own and control everything. They own the people who are supposed to be policing them, which is the media, the fourth estate, which is supposed to be looking after looking out for us, but is owned by them. And so we're seeing record profit. We saw record profits for Pfizer, and we saw a disproportionate amount of our people in Congress who were making hand over fist money being invested in Pfizer and Moderna and these companies. That's why I spoke out against it, and that's why I will continue to speak out against it. You know, I know a lot of people buy whatever propaganda is given to them by, the government, the media, etc. But I hope you're seeing the danger that puts us all in. When you have these companies that make so much money and have so much influence over every single part of our lives. Here in this study, they found the 4 largest food manufacturing firms had among the largest increase in profits. Food production has received particular attention recently due to the large social cost of rapidly rising food prices. Moreover, as highlighted in the last study, argued that food prices play an outsized role in causing inflation to ripple through the economy. Clapp and Howard highlighted that only 4 companies, Archer, Daniels, Midland, ADM, Cargill, Bunge, and Dreyfus, control 70 through 90% of the world grain market. 4 companies control an estimated 70 to 90% of the world's grain market. Wow. They found they account for 70% of the global grain market, and they registered a dramatic rise in profits during 2021 and 2022. That type of market power can exacerbate price shocks and lead to prices rising more than warranted cost increases. Profits for ADM, Bunge, or Bungie, I guess it is either Bunge or Bungie, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. And yes, Louis Dreyfus, that's, what's her name, Louis Dreyfus? Julia Louis Dreyfus, folks. She's really rich. Rose 255% in 2021. The researchers made clear that they were not asserting that profits were the only cause of inflation, stating, "We argue that market power by some corporations and in some sectors, including temporary market power emerging in the aftermath of the pandemic, amplified inflation. It made price increases peak higher and remain more persistent than it would have in a world with less market power." Wow. The researchers recommended fiscal and other policies to protect economies from external shocks like sharp energy price rises, a fresh approach to competition policy, and sure to stir the most pushback, a global approach to taxing excessive profits, defined as anything above 10% more than previous averages. In mid-November, Senator Bob Casey, chairman of the Subcommittee on Children and Families, released a report, "Stuffing Their Pockets: How Big Food and Agriculture Businesses Are Making Your Holiday Meals More Expressive." From the report, this report examines how the agribusiness companies that process Americans' food have increased prices for everyday staple foods and raises questions about why those price increases are necessary. The same companies have a history of engaging in price fixing, colluding to raise prices, anti-competitive conduct, and touting their ability to raise prices without limit. Now, this is a good thing. The Department of Justice recently initiated a lawsuit that suggests almost the entire chicken, turkey, and pork industry are engaged in price fixing practices. Hell, look at the beef people too. If y'all gonna look into that, look into the beef, because I used to pay $7.99 for a hamburger just last year before last, and then it went up to $12.99. At that point, it's like, nah, I think I'll just eat some chicken. Okay. The DOJ has said that the industry sent sensitive information related to price, cost, and output to a firm called AgriStats, Inc., which told them how much they should charge for their products. According to the DOJ, executives at some of the country's largest meat processors testified that they could not recall any examples in which their companies used AgriStats information to lower the sales prices to gain market share. An executive at Smithfield, a pork processor, summarized AgriStats consulting advice in 4 words: just raise your prices. Just raise your prices. That's who these people are. They know that we are in a time of global turmoil, instability, and their answer to that, while they're making record historic profits, is just raise your price. And if you didn't know, Smithfield, the pork processor, those are the people who during the pandemic had hundreds of employees getting sick because they wouldn't allow anybody to call off work during the pandemic in some of those plants. And so they actually had lots of people die in the early days of the pandemic at the Smithfield pork plant. So again, these are people who do not care about you. These are people who lie to you, they cheat you, and they steal from you. Them and the people who enable them, i.e. our politicians, should not be trusted on under any circumstances. But still, I see a lot of you still think that, oh, you still play this lesser of two evils games with these people. And I'm telling you, both parties in this country, the Republicans, the Democrats, all these people call these people friends. All of them. They eat at the table with all of them. All right, folks. That number again, 219-885-1371. That number again, 219-885-1371. If you got something to say about this or Emerson burning down, call now and I'll get you in before the Happy Happies. 219-885-1371. That number again, 219-885-1371. We are coming in towards the end of the hour. We'll be right back, either with your calls or the Happy Happies. We'll be right back after these.